Hello and welcome to episode 328 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How are you?
Hello, Jason. I'm well. I'm sitting at home still, and as it turns out, you are too.
I am. I didn't intend to be, but
You're not supposed to be.
That's how things work out. Sometimes you plan to go places and you don't, and you're not all that mad about it in the end.
But in true AvGeek fashion, I guess, you've been to 2 New York City airports this week and have not flown anywhere.
Yes. Well, one of those I never intended to fly anywhere. So 12 hours spent at the 2 airports. I got on one plane, didn't go anywhere. But on Monday, I joined the new JFK Terminal 1 for a tour of the still very much under construction terminal there. Also a signing for its newest airline tenant, which would be China Airlines. Very excited about that, of course. But we got a good old-fashioned hard hat tour of the new under construction terminal, and you
Love
just can't,
hard hat tour.
You can't say no to that, even if it is 95 degrees and 100% humidity out. And of course, the HVAC isn't working because they haven't installed it yet. But it was really nice. I think we're going to end up being weirdly happy with our airports in their future state when all is said and done. There are 2 major terminals being built right now at JFK. Terminal 6, which is an add-on to Terminal 5, I guess, kind of. And the new Terminal 1, which completely replaces old Terminal 1, is also on the footprint of what was Terminals 2 and 3. So it will become the largest international terminal at JFK, which I guess means largest international terminal in New York. I guess it must mean that. But it is just absolutely massive compared to everything that predates it and everything that is next to it. It makes the old Terminal 1 kind of look like a little third-tier domestic airport terminal. It's kind of funny how everything somewhat works there right now, but the new terminal is going to be really something. They're especially proud, interestingly, about the CBP facility, of all things. It's not going to be in the basement. There's going to be windows.
Whoa.
I know. We actually had a brainstorm on this there, and we can't think of any other airport in the U.S. with a CBP facility that isn't stashed away in the windowless basement. So they're very happy about that to make the experience for everyone positive, which is not easy.
They're going to try and welcome people to the United States?
Weird, yeah. I mean,
light?
They might have to import leaky drop ceiling tiles from other terminals to really make you feel like you're in New York, but they're not planning on having
This is the New York I know
any.
and love.
Yes. If it's not leaking on you as soon as you arrive, are you really in New York?
There you go. No, I don't think you are. I think that's just the way the world works.
Yes. And then there was yesterday, which also did not go as planned. Yeah, that was, I've probably mentioned this before, but my least favorite route in the world, LaGuardia Dulles, the cursed route, as I call it. The curse struck again. Really thought we'd beat the storms out of New York and DC, but we didn't. We spent 3 hours taxiing around LaGuardia, only to be the next departure for takeoff. Literally, you make a left, you're on the runway, you make a right, and you're not on the runway. And we turned right, unfortunately, because we didn't have enough fuel for our reroute, which is only 150 miles added flight route, which we apparently did not have enough fuel for, which is kind of surprising. Republic wouldn't have put us out there with as much fuel as possible, given LaGuardia shenanigans in the summer, in July, whatever. But when it really gets fun is when we eventually went back to the gate to refuel. They said you can get off the plane. Just if you get off, take all your things and either don't come back or you come back before we go. And we spent less than 20 minutes out in the terminal going to get something to eat. And when we got back to the gate, they were gone without us. So, whoops.
Oh, Jason.
It was only 20 minutes. I don't even think it was actually 20 minutes, but they left at least 5 of us behind. And then the plane just sat in the alleyway for about an hour before it went anywhere. So I didn't make it out. Does this count as me missing a flight? Because I've never missed a flight before.
I think this flight missed you.
Yeah, that's it. I'll
take
that. That's more accurate.
Well, I'm glad you're here today, wherever you are, so that we can get this week's episode in. A reminder For next week, we won't have an episode next week. I am being untethered from my desk and I'm going on vacation. I'm traveling with the family, so wish me luck. And I will be sure to inform everyone how it goes when I return and when we return with new episodes in 2 weeks' time.
Some advice. If you go back to the gate for more gas and they let you off the plane, don't go far.
I'm going to leave one of the kids in the plane so that they... No, that's probably a bad idea.
No, okay, that's the worst idea. Oh, no, you got to refine this thought.
Okay, let's do the news because there is a lot to get through this week before we are off. And it's some very hard-hitting stuff and then some not hard-hitting stuff at all. So I think we've got a good mix this week. Let's start in India, where John Ostrower from the Air Current is reporting that investigators are now focusing on movement of the engine fuel control switches on the Air India 787 that crashed last month. So this is ahead of an expected preliminary report that is likely going to be issued late this week or early next week. And once that report comes out, we will have commentary on that, if not on the podcast immediately for next week, then at least on the Flight Radar 24 blog. So keep an eye on that. What Ostrower is reporting at this point is that the investigation does not point to any mechanical or design issue with the 787 or the GE-NX engines that power the 787-8.
And that checks out since we haven't heard any emergency airworthiness directives or really any direction from Boeing or the engine manufacturer, really anyone to take any action because there's no action to be taken right now.
Exactly. And further to that, the investigation thus far, and this is John Ostrower reporting, quoting people who have knowledge of the investigation, that there's been no sign of fuel contamination, which was one of the, I guess, conjectures being put forth by a number of folks, as well as no improper retraction of the aircraft's flaps, which was one of the immediate conjectures that was being posited by a vast majority of folks.
Yeah, the fuel contamination being a much more plausible theory, I guess, than the flaps being retracted. That really wouldn't have made a ton of sense, but fuel contamination certainly would help explain a double engine failure. But short of that, well, let's go farther into what John had to say.
Right. So as Jason mentioned, there have been no emergency airworthiness directives from anyone. There have been no multi-operator messages from Boeing or GE, and those are basically emergency broadcasts by the manufacturer of either the airframe or the engine saying, this is something that we know needs to be changed now. So do that now. There have been no urgent recommendations from either the Indian Air Accident Investigation Board or the US NTSB, and the FAA has not said anything or issued any CANIX, which is the Continued Airworthiness Notification to the International Community, another emergency broadcast. None of that has come across. I will caution, and John wanted me to make sure that our listeners knew this, John's reporting is not saying that this was the cause of the crash. That's not what this reporting is saying. This report is saying that this is room for further investigation. We don't know why, we don't know how, we don't know who, we don't know any of that. And that will unfortunately likely not be in the preliminary report that comes out in a week or so, but we'll have to wait until the final report. So let's step back for a moment and talk about what the fuel control switches are, where they are, and what they do.
And the protections against accidentally futzing around with them.
Yes. So the fuel control switches, so the 787 being a two-engine aircraft, there are two fuel control switches. They have two positions, run and cutoff. They are located immediately behind the throttle levers. They are small-ish. It's kind of a half of a finger length knob-sized switch.
The little stubby little knobs.
Yeah. The ends light up if the engines are on fire. So they light up red, which provides a visual cue to the pilots to show that this engine is sensing fire. And they are operated by lift stops. So it's not like a light switch where you can flick it down to cut off and you can flick it up to run. The controls need to be lifted and then pushed to get over a physical stop
detent,
lock.
Basically, yeah. There are also, in this very well annotated diagram from the air current, there are also guarded brackets on either side to the left and right. So if you are manipulating, let's say, the flaps, your hand can't accidentally move to the left and hit somehow and then lift and then move these levers. There's an actual physical piece of metal that prevents you from hitting these two knobs as well. So there's about as much protection short of putting a cover over these knobs as possible.
Yeah. So that's the physical stuff. That's how it's supposed to work. That's where they are. That's how things work. What we don't know is whether or not one or both of those switches were moved. And what we absolutely do not know at this point, and what John Ostrauer's reporting is saying, is that they cannot rule in or out any movement that was improper or inadvertent or intentional. So we don't know why these switches moved, but the investigation is focusing on the movement of those switches.
Yep. And I mean, maybe it's possible, getting probably too far down the realm of speculation here, but we've seen in the past issues with the A350 and its fuel cutoff switches, basically. I believe there were incidents where beverages were being spilled on that section of the throttle quadrant, and it was kind of shorting out that the engine cutoff and was actually leading to engine cutoff. So the investigation may lead to these knobs being the source of what happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean the knobs themselves were actually touched in any way. We have so much to learn, so many unanswered questions that hopefully we will figure out at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's very early days yet, and we'll see what comes out in the preliminary report. There probably won't be very much out in the preliminary report that's due this week or next. And then we'll begin the long wait of waiting to see what the final report says, which should give us the probable cause of this crash.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, let's move on to the interesting week that has befallen Lufthansa.
Yeah, it's been a week for them.
They've had some problems, not really anything within their control. Things have just happened to them this week. The first was an A340 that was in Boston and supposed to go back to Frankfurt, but it was damaged by a high loader on arrival. So they were, I assume, unloading cargo on arrival, and the aircraft was punctured. The aircraft skin was punctured, which ruptured the pressure vessel. So they repaired it well enough to fly back to Frankfurt to complete the repair, but they had to fly it back unpressurized.
Ooh, that's a long way to go.
The entire Boston-Frankfurt flight was at 10,000 feet.
Oh. Bumpy.
10 and a half hours.
Wow. And what's the...
That's normally a
six and a half
hour flight. 6.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
normally
not a fun day.
6.5 hour flight that lasted 10 and a half hours. I mean, crew alone, so I can only imagine how fun it was for them.
Oh, John Walton's going to be real unhappy that somebody tried
he's
to
already
harm
on
an A340-600.
He's already on it. Don't worry.
Don't
worry. Our good friend John Walton, A340 enthusiast, he's already on it, trying to understand.
Specifically A340-600. He would be very upset with you if you didn't add that.
Yes. Next, this is just one of those things where you go, what was going on here? And then as the situation unfolds, you go, okay, that all makes sense. And I'm really glad that safety prevailed. So there was a Lufthansa 747 that was inbound from Frankfurt to Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires weather was just awful. Dense fog. I want to say the ceiling was 200 feet at best for much of the day, and nothing was really getting in. So the flight diverted to Asunción. Then they tried again to get into Buenos Aires. That didn't work, and they ended up in Sao Paulo. The aircraft squawked 7700 because they were low on fuel and because the crew had reached their timeout. So they needed to get on the ground to make sure that everything was within safety margins. They did that. Everything was fine. This was one of those things where the squawking 7700, internationally recognized symbol for general emergency. However, the definition of emergency, because of the safety margins enjoyed by commercial aviation, no one was ever in danger. This was we're getting near our legal requirements for fuel and duty time, and so we need priority landing. And that's exactly what happened.
It's a, hey, look at me, I need special attention call, basically.
Exactly. And they got it.
Yeah, I'm unimpressed by this one. It sounds like literally every flight in the New York area. Forget New York, the Northeast, but it's compounding.
Exactly. It's compounding. And in a way, Lufthansa ended up with, 3 separate countries that they were not trying to land in. So that was not bad for logbook purposes, I guess.
It happens.
Then there's this one. So this happened overnight on July 8th, so yesterday evening, a Lufthansa flight from Miami to Frankfurt had a cat on board. That's not unusual.
No, I've had an odd number of cats on my flights this year, actually. Quiet cats, which is nice.
This cat, I can't speak for the cat's volume on this particular flight, but what I can speak to was the cat's containment, which was not. The carrier that the cat was in had a hole in it. And if you have a cat or know anything about cats, they can squeeze in and out of very small spaces.
They are liquid. That's true.
And this cat got out into the cabin during the flight.
Not good.
And so the cabin crew found one of the linen bags that they put used first class napkins in. Well, that bag, not airtight, isn't permeable so much. And they realized that the cat couldn't breathe. So they took the cat out of the bag. They let the cat out of the bag, Jason.
I see.
They locked it in one of the lavatories.
Huh. I'm surprised they were able to catch the cat. That's not easy.
They caught the cat. They were able to lock it in one of the lavatories, slapped an in-op sticker on one of the lavatories, and they made it to Frankfurt.
I hope they closed the toilet seat first. Otherwise, it could have gotten a little messy. But that's impressive. But really, I mean, apparently none of the cabin crew were cat owners, because all you got to do is put a cardboard box down at the galley, and the problem sorts itself out. Cat will find that box.
I don't know what went on there, but that's the story as was relayed from someone with direct knowledge of the events on board.
Happy ending.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Even if it's not true, even if that's a completely made up story, I'm okay with
it. No, it's not made up. Unfortunately, we don't have pictures because that person was not in a picture taking mood, shall we say. Okay, let's go to Antarctica. But we are going to go with permission.
That's the tricky bit. You kind of need that to go somewhere where you're not really supposed to go, ever.
So Ethan Gu is a 19-year-old pilot on a journey he was trying to be the first person or the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents. The idea behind these flights was that he was going to raise $1 million for cancer research, which is a certainly admirable goal, and I wish him well doing so.
Absolutely.
We may even talk to him about that at some point. But we can't talk to him right now because he's currently being detained by Chilean authorities on King George Island off the north coast of Antarctica because he decided that he was going to fly there from Punta Arenas and not get permission to do so. The Chilean authorities are quite upset that he did this. The statement that they released reads in part, quote, "The pilot's failure to provide information immediately triggered the alert protocols for such situations, including the deployment of aerial assets for its search, entailing the use of state resources and posing risks to operational safety." So he was supposed to fly from Punta Arenas to Ushuaia, which is certainly well within the range of a Cessna 182, and certainly a common flight, especially if you're trying to get closer to Antarctica as part of what he was trying to do. That was the final destination. He ended up at King George Island, which is basically the northern tip of the Antarctic archipelago.
Which I guess qualifies as the continent, sure.
It qualifies as Antarctica for the purposes of that's what flag is there at the station.
It also qualifies for the purposes of pissing off authorities.
Exactly. Here's the statement that representatives provided us. Quote, "Ethan is flying around the world to raise funds for cancer patients. In this context, he departed from Punta Arenas with an approved flight plan to Ushuaia. Due to weather conditions, and in order to ensure his safety, he had to divert to Teniente Marsh, which is the airport on King George Island." And I'll continue the quote, "which is a public airfield according to Chilean regulations."
That is the least plausible thing I have ever heard.
So I thought to myself, okay, sure, I will give him the benefit of the doubt and say maybe there was weather. I mean, these are areas of unpredictable weather, and winds can go out of bounds rather quickly. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say maybe returning back to Punta Arenas, which is what he did the day before, mind you, was unavailable. Maybe Ushuaia was unavailable. I don't know. So I looked up the METAR for Ushuaia. Winds 260 at 13 knots. Scattered clouds at 4,000 feet.
Pleasant. Very nice.
Winds growing to 18 knots max and then falling down to 11 knots minimum. All at 250 or 260. Jason, I will give you two guesses. Let me preface this again, saying the winds were at 250 and 260 on the heading. I will give you two guesses what the runway heading at Ushuaia is.
I'm going to guess they line up real nicely with those wind headings.
Sure do. So they've got runway 25 at Ushuaia that was certainly available to other traffic during this time period. I also checked the satellite. There is no intense precipitation at Punta Arenas or Ushuaia. There is, however, poor weather between both of those airports and King George Island where he landed.
As you would expect there to be, because there usually is.
So all of that said, that's his statement.
Yeah, the Drake Passage isn't typically known as one of the calmest places in the world, is it?
In fact, it's not. I mean, there are multiple names for the degrees of latitude that are increasingly perilous.
Yeah, I think in this case, the only thing the authorities would like less than someone trying to do this is somebody lying about why they are doing it, because he was kind of caught red-handed here. He's still there, right? Or at least the aircraft.
So here's the thing. We know for sure the airplane's still there. I have no knowledge of him leaving. So the Chilean authorities filed, I'm not exactly sure what it is in Chile, but basically a complaint to the public prosecutor's office saying, hey, this guy did a bunch of bad stuff. The Chilean prosecutor agreed, and they're detaining him up to 90 days while the investigation continues. So I guess he's still there on the island. I don't know if he's been flown back to the Chilean mainland or what, but he's at least still in Chile as far as I know.
All right. Well, it makes the press outreach or the media outreach they did to us like literally the day before all that much more timely. I wish we had spoken to him the day before and said, do you think that's a good idea?
That would have been a fun episode of the podcast.
It would have been.
You're doing what now?
Are you sure?
So his invitation to come on the podcast is open. I would love to hear his side of the story. I absolutely would.
Yeah.
To learn more about what was going on here.
There's always two sides to a story, but this one, I don't know.
We'll leave it there and move on. This next story, it happens from time to time, and it's never less shocking and horrific and sad when it does. Oof. This week, a person was ingested by a Volotea A319 engine at Milan Bergamo Airport. The person made it onto the airfield by entering the airside via car, driving the wrong way down basically the entrance exit road. Then they led security and police on a foot chase throughout the apron area and on the ramp. And the chase ended when that person was ingested into one of the aircraft's engines. They were fatally injured, and that's all we know about what happened so far. We don't know if this was a plan that this person had. We have no information on that at this point. But all of the passengers and crew on board were safe, and no one else was injured, which is a certainly very real possibility given that the aircraft was basically just pushed back and getting ready to taxi, and there were still other people around the aircraft. So we will continue to follow this story, but a very sad event taking place. And like I said, these things happen from time to time, and it's never less sad.
No, usually it's very sad when it's an airport and airline employee, but in this case, it's also just strange.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So more information when that becomes available, if it becomes available. The NTSB late last week released its preliminary report on the close call between Delta Airlines A319 and a flight of 4 T-38s that were set to perform a flyover at a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. The preliminary report I had to read, I think 3 or 4 times before I began to understand what was happening. The preliminary report is pointing to a misunderstanding, miscommunication, variation in what words mean between two people situation between air traffic controllers at the Potomac TRACON and the Washington National Tower facility. The communication that there would be a flyover and that departures from DCA should stop was never an issue. Controllers at both the Potomac TRACON as well as DCA Tower knew that there was going to be a flyover. They even knew about what time it was going to take place. So they communicated and said the T-38s were going to be around DCA at a little after 3, so or 1500. Let's keep it all 24-hour clock. That way I won't get confused. Then later on, they said that there's a stop time of 17, meaning that the tower should pause departures at 17 minutes past 1500.
Okay.
Then at 1502, the TRACON controller said, your new time on target is 1515. At 1512, the TRACON supervisor contacted the tower again and then said, quote, stop all departures. Hard time is now 17. Quote, hard time, end quote, is going to be the key phrase here, because the tower controller then replied, quote, hard time 17, we will stop all departures. So, Jason, what does that mean to you?
Hard stop is in stop everything you're doing at the hard time? Not exactly phrasing I'm familiar with, but that,
nor
context
I,
seems to
but
make
in
sense.
This context, I take that to mean, okay, the hard time is now 17, meaning at 1517, the DCA Tower controller, will stop all departures.
Yep.
So at 1515, Delta Flight 2983 was cleared for takeoff from runway 19. As the Delta jet was taking off, the TRACON called the tower and said, hey, why is that jet taking off? And the tower controller said, I've got 2 more minutes. You said a hard time is 1517. And the Delta jet was almost in the air at that point. They coordinated to make sure that there would be no closer approach between the T-38s and the Delta jet. They were quite close, but there was no contact between the flights, between the Delta A319 and the T-38s.
Sounds like they interpreted that as a soft time, not hard time, or like mushy time. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that could have been much more clearly communicated.
Yes, next time maybe just say, don't move any airplanes after this time.
Right. So that's the preliminary report. Hopefully we'll get a bit more between when the docket's released, and we'll get the interviews from the air traffic controllers. Because I think the transcript of those interviews will actually be much more illuminating than the preliminary report. Moving over to the commercial side of the industry, let's pick it up with Boeing now going to end up with, not that they wanted to, but end up with Spirit's Belfast assets, I guess, basically the Shorts Brothers factory in Belfast, except for the A220 wing production. So Airbus is going to get that, and Boeing is going to get everything else, which will include Bombardier fuselages. So that's going to be interesting.
Okay.
They're embracing it, so they say. I mean, they're saying that this is something that they're, quote, we will warmly welcome Short Brothers Belfast to the Boeing family. Boeing taking ownership of Belfast is an outcome we've known was a possibility for some time. Real ringing endorsement there.
Oh, an outcome we knew could happen one day. It is, oof. I feel like they would have preferred Airbus. Or maybe literally.
No, that was Boeing's comment.
Oh, ooh, that's even worse somehow.
I know. So this is the thing where Airbus agreed to take over the A220 wing production facilities. Boeing was trying to find someone else to buy the rest of it. No one wanted to buy it. And so now it's Boeing's to figure out what to do with.
I feel like we could have stood a chance here. Looked under the couch for some coins. Could have had a production facility.
Hey. There's still time. I'm sure that we would be able to scrounge up some change for that.
Next time.
There you go. The U.S. has now lifted the prohibition on aerospace component exports to China, specifically the LEAP 1C engine that powers the C919 and the CF34 engine that powers what is now known as the C909, formerly the ARJ 21-700. That comes after a few months ago, late May, the agreement reached between the U.S. and China over U.S. access to rare earth minerals found in China. So a very heavy-handed transactional lifting of the prohibitions, but engines are now able to move again. For its part, GE and CFM said, we continued to build the engines the whole time. So now
so basically they said, we kind of just ignored this the whole time.
And just didn't ship anything. Yes.
Yeah. And then we just, shipped it once the nonsense ended. And maybe the nonsense comes back. And maybe this happens over again. I don't know. But if I were Comac, I would have been not too happy about the prospects of that lasting for all too long.
Certainly not.
Hey, that's great to have bargaining chips. I don't really know what rare earth minerals are exactly, but I know they're important. So that was a good bargaining chip.
Speaking of things ending, Jason, Sweden is ending its flight tax. This was a per passenger, per flight tax introduced in 2018 that was commonly known as flight shaming, or the tax that was associated with flight shaming that came out of the climate activism by young Swede Greta Thunberg. This scrapping of the tax comes as the government now looked around and said, hey, our aviation sector is not doing so well.
Hey, wait a minute. We may have gone too far. Well, I, for one, am looking forward to my next flight to Stockholm to be a little bit cheaper because I was going to take it anyway. But if it's a little bit cheaper, I'll be happy about that.
So this was a tax that was between 76 and 517 crowns, which roughly equates to $7.80 to $53, give or take, depending on what exchange rate what day's exchange rate you're using. But the tax, at least initially, worked. Airports saw passenger levels drop. Rail operators saw passenger levels climb. However, smaller airports in the more remote regions of Sweden that are the lifeline, similar to Alaska in the US, where the airport is the hub of community for a lot of folks, those airports suffered, shrank, and lost commercial services.
Yeah, that checks out. IATA is obviously happy about this, being the aviation industry's or commercial aviation's lobbying body. They were quoted as saying, "We congratulate the Swedish government for abolishing the aviation tax. It's excellent news, which recognizes the taxation of air passengers is counterproductive economically and ineffectively environmentally." And I guess part of that's true. It did turn out to be ineffective for environmental purposes in the end. It started off strong, but didn't quite stay that way, did it?
Yeah. And it's not to say that the goal is not admirable and not worthwhile.
It is.
And so I think that's certainly one of the things that often is lost in the conversation here, is that any reduction in emissions by aviation, until there's a magic way to not emit, that reduction's going to have to come from fewer flights. So in a way, this was very effective. The unintended consequences, as we've seen with a lot of climate-friendly policies, were not necessarily worthwhile as far as the government was concerned for the people of Sweden. So another thing where these certainly very well-intentioned climate-friendly policies have had unintended practical effects on existing folk. How we figure that out is, I think, the key to making all of these things work.
Yeah. So that will make your SAS flights slightly cheaper. But you know what's going to make your SAS flights probably a bit more expensive in the very near future, Ian?
I do. I'm not entirely thrilled about this one, but I am happy about it. I'm generally speaking, I'm happy that this is
generally positive for SAS's future prospects of being a going concern. But Air France KLM has announced that they want to take a majority stake in SAS. So not just a minority stake, but a majority stake, which will basically make it the Air France KLM SAS group at this point. That will almost certainly mean SAS joins the Atlantic joint venture in the future, which will normalize its prices with Air France and KLM, which means fares will just go up, which means passengers will fly less, which, hey, maybe we'll meet our environmental goals that way. Except the increased fare won't be a tax that goes to the Swedish government to do other things with. It'll just go to Air France KLM.
Yeah, so this was always the plan. When Air France KLM came in and invested in SAS, this was always the plan, that Air France KLM would take a majority stake or outright ownership of SAS eventually. The good thing is that this is happening much sooner than they thought because of how well SAS has turned things around. So that's the good news.
That's nice.
And as people who fly SAS on a regular basis, I agree. They have quite, in fact, turned things around. What's interesting here is that as part of this, kind of new phase in things, Air France KLM is saying SAS is a very undersized fleet given the size of the market they serve.
And an elderly fleet at that, at least the wide bodies. Yeah.
To see, how many more A350s they plan on picking up. So I'm excited.
They shed quite a number of them in recent years, right?
But they never had that many to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that one goes. We'll also see, as Jason mentioned, how long it takes for them to enter into the joint venture. It'll be some time because the majority ownership won't happen overnight. Then the joint venture agreement would have to be approved by the US DOT. And that timeline could be who knows how long when it's all said and done. So this isn't something that's going to happen next week, but it is something that is on the horizon.
Yes, and I will certainly be submitting comment to the US DOT in opposition of that if and when it does happen. And I expect you too.
I look forward to reading your comments. Let's go through some orders and deliveries. We have a couple post-Paris Air Show, a couple more, really. We talked about a few last week, a couple more post-Paris Air Show orders. These both going to Airbus as part of a state visit by Malaysia to France last week. The first being Malaysia Airlines exercising options for an additional 20 A330-900 NEOs. That will take the total fleet up to 40 when it is all said and done, though it sounds like Malaysia Airlines might not be all said or all done yet with their order book.
Quite the little rebound.
Yeah. And AirAsia has purchased 50 plus options for 20 A321 XLRs. That comes on top of a slight reconfiguration of an existing order to slide a few more of those orders to the XLR variant. And Tony Fernandez also says that they're looking into an, quote, up to 150 aircraft order. That order is said to be comprised, probably, of Embraer E2s and A220s, and will likely be announced within the next month.
AirAsia just can't get enough aircraft, can it? Kind of reminds me of the very old Simpsons episode where the devil or whatever is just jamming donuts into Homer's mouth, and he just keeps going more. This is AirAsia. They just can't get enough airplanes.
So many airplanes.
More.
All the airplanes. For its part, Airbus has reported the deliveries for June and the first half of the year. So Airbus deliveries for the first half of the year are on par with the first half of the last 2 years as well. So 23, 24, 25, roughly same number of deliveries. But deliveries have surged in June with 63 aircraft going home to airlines and one government in June. So 12 A220 300s. That's 300s, not A220s generally, because no one wants the A220-100 anymore.
I like them.
Fine. Jason wants them. 20 A320 Neos, 23 A321 Neos, one A330-200. That was an MRTT for Canada, which I believe calls them the Husky. Mm-hmm. Then you've got two A330-900 Neos and 5 A350-900s. Airbus took in 156 net orders in June. Net orders because they lost all 7 A350 freighter orders from lessor Air Lease, which was previously the launch customer. Of the
Do we know why that happened?
We don't.
Interesting.
Air Lease says that all shall be revealed when we release our second quarter earnings.
Oh, okay. We'll take a look at that when that happens.
And then a couple small points to round out the show. We talked about the proposed takeoff performance monitoring software that the European Union Aviation Safety Agency is considering adopting or is pushing towards adoption. An A380 pilot wrote in and said, hey, we've had this for 5 years, and sent us a screenshot. So that was pretty neat. So yes, all of this is already happening. This would require it more broadly on a much wider array of aircraft. So the technology is there. It just needs to be required so that it's elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The Frontier A321 that had a very, very, very hard landing in San Juan in April 15th has now been repaired enough to ferry back from San Juan to, it's supposed to go to Birmingham. It's powered up right now. It was supposed to leave earlier today, but we'll see if it actually gets out. This was the A321neo that bounced so hard the left nose landing gear came off and departed the aircraft impacted the engine and created a right mess for the airline and the airport.
All things considered, 3 months to do that work, at least to ferry it home, that's not too terrible.
No, not too terrible at all. Delta's going, hey, we could have done it in 6 weeks.
Could have been 6 days.
It could have been 6 days. We would have just used a wheel from some kid's bicycle and some duct tape and it would have been fine. But that aircraft will hopefully be on the move soon. Keeping an eye on that one. And in news that, okay, sure, why not? The TSA has changed their policy seemingly overnight, and you don't have to take off your shoes anymore.
Oh, okay. This one trickled out real weird. There was like a Forbes blog post referring to someone on TikTok who used to work for the TSA that doesn't anymore, and that every mainstream media just picked up on. And lo and behold, 2 days later, it was confirmed by the TSA that you don't have to take your shoes off anymore, which, okay, great. But apparently technology has progressed to the point where that's no longer a necessary thing.
Excellent.
Okay, great. Let's just hope it's consistent and applied evenly across all checkpoints in the US, because we know how much the TSA loves to have different rules per different lanes, per different terminals in different airports in different parts of the country. And they will certainly bark those rules at you as loud as possible. And it's always your fault.
To be fair, Jason, it is always your fault.
It is. That's true.
All right. This has been episode 328 of AvTalk. As a reminder, no new episode next week. And we will be back the following week with whatever has happened in the time that we are gone. Until then, I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.